I remember the exact sound my pen made when it touched that paper. A soft scratch, like something dying quietly. Derek was sitting across from me and he was smiling. Not a big smile, just that small, satisfied one he got when things went his way. His mother, Sandra, sat beside him with her arms folded, wearing that expression she always wore when she looked at me, like I was something she'd been waiting to return. And Crystal, his girlfriend, standing right there in my attorney's office like she had every right to be, actually laughed. A real laugh, delighted almost, like I was the punchline to a joke I hadn't been told. I was 7 months pregnant, my belly pressed against the edge of the conference table, my back had been aching since morning, and I sat there, hand trembling just slightly, and I signed my name. Emma Calloway. That was the last time I used that name. They had no idea my father was 11 minutes away. I grew up in Millbrook, Ohio, small town, the kind of place where people wave at you from their driveways and mean it. My father, Richard Hayes, was a retired Army colonel, broad-shouldered, quiet, the kind of man a room reorganizes itself around when he walks in. He wasn't harsh, he was just solid, certain, like a wall you could lean against and trust it wouldn't move. My mother, Margaret, was the warmth in our house. Sunday pot roast, the smell of coffee at 6 in the morning, the one who remembered everyone's birthdays and prayed for people she'd never met. I was their only child. I was quiet, studious, became a nurse, stayed close to home because home was good to me, and I knew it. I met Derek Calloway at a charity fundraiser when I was 25. He was handsome in that easy, natural way. Tall, light eyes, a laugh that made the whole room want to be in on the joke. He asked for my number and then actually called the next day. Not a text, a call. I thought that meant something. His family had money, old family money, the kind that comes with opinions about everything. His mother, Sandra, made her feelings clear from the very beginning, without ever saying anything direct enough to argue with. A look here, a comment there. Derek always had such a particular taste, said with a smile aimed just past my shoulder. I told myself I was being sensitive. Derek told me the same. He proposed after 8 months. We got married in the backyard of my parents' house on a Saturday in June. Simple ceremony. Wildflowers. My father walked me down the grass aisle and whispered in my ear, "You can always come home." I squeezed his arm and smiled. At the time, I thought it was just something fathers say at weddings. I didn't understand he was planting it in me like a seed, something to reach for later. The first year of our marriage was fine, maybe more than fine. Derek could be generous and funny, and there were nights I thought we were building something real. But somewhere in the second year, things shifted in a way I couldn't quite name. Sandra started appearing more, dropping by without calling, commenting on how we decorated the living room, on my choice to work night shifts. Derek never told her to stop. He'd shrug and say she meant well. I started shrinking my opinions to avoid the friction. Then I got pregnant. It wasn't planned, but the moment I saw that test, I felt a joy so deep it surprised me. I sat on the edge of the bathtub and cried the good kind of tears, the kind that feel like relief even when you can't explain why. Derek's reaction was measured. He said the right words, he hugged me, but there was something behind his eyes that I filed away without looking at too closely because I didn't want to know what it was. And names started appearing. Crystal. He mentioned her once at dinner, someone from work, and moved on too quickly. I noticed, but said nothing. A few weeks later, I saw a text notification cross his phone screen, just her name, and his whole body shifted when he saw me looking. I asked him about it one evening, gently. No accusation, just a question. He got angry in that quiet, controlled way of his, told me I was paranoid, that pregnancy was making me irrational, that he couldn't believe I didn't trust him, and I backed down. I apologized. I sat across from my own suspicion and sent it to its room like a misbehaving child. 6 months later, sitting in that conference room, I would think about that moment and feel a grief I didn't have a word for yet. Sandra started visiting almost weekly. She'd sit in my kitchen and make small comments about how tired I looked, how Derek seemed stressed, how marriage was hard work and not everyone was cut out for it. I realized, slowly, the way you realize the temperature has dropped, not in one moment, but in the accumulated chill, that Sandra already knew. She had known for a while, and she wasn't there to comfort me. She was there to watch the clock. I found the receipt on a Tuesday morning. Derek's jacket left on the back of the kitchen chair. A hotel 2 towns over, 2 guests. I stood there holding it so long my coffee went cold. I waited until that evening. I put the receipt on the kitchen table and sat down and folded my hands and waited. Derek walked in, dropped his keys, saw the piece of paper, and went very still. He sat down across from me. And then he didn't deny it. He rubbed his face with both hands and said, "I've been seeing Crystal for 4 months. It happened. It just happened." The way he said it, like it was weather, like it was something that had occurred in the world around him, rather than something he had chosen every single day while I was carrying his child. I asked him what he wanted to do. He looked at the table for a long time. Then he said, "I think we both know this marriage isn't working, Emma." That night, I called my mother. I couldn't get through more than 3 sentences before I couldn't speak at all. She listened to everything I couldn't say. She wanted to call my father immediately. I told her no, not yet. I needed to get through the next part on my own. I needed to know I still could. Sandra called the next morning. She was polished and businesslike, like she was running a meeting. She said they had spoken to a family attorney. She said the process would be simple and clean if I cooperated. She used the word generous about the settlement in the way that told me it wouldn't be. And then she said, "The baby complicates things, but we'll make sure everyone's taken care of." As though my daughter were a logistical problem to be managed, as though I were a signature waiting to happen. I understood then what I was dealing with, not a painful ending, an organized removal. The meeting was set for 10 days later. My attorney, Brian Cole, reviewed the proposed terms and told me they were inadequate. I was entitled to more, significantly more, especially with a child coming. He said I had grounds to fight. He said I should fight. But I was so tired, the kind of tired that settles into your bones and tells you that maybe the path of least resistance is actually wisdom. I started telling myself stories about fresh starts, about raising my daughter somewhere new and quiet, about letting go. The night before the meeting, I picked up my phone to call my dad twice. Both times I put it back down. I didn't want him to see me undone. He had never seen me undone, and some stubborn, foolish part of me wanted to protect that image even now. I got dressed carefully the next morning. Blue dress, hair done. I was not going to walk into that room looking like what they thought I was. They were already there when I arrived. Derek sat on one side of the long table, Sandra beside him like a co-counsel, which is exactly what she was. Crystal was there too, which was not part of any agreement, not professionally appropriate, and absolutely deliberate. A statement, a reminder of who had won. Brian Cole sat on my side of the table, looking like a man who wished he were somewhere else. Sandra looked at me when I walked in and said, "I'm glad you came, Emma. The sooner this is done, the better for everyone." Crystal leaned over and said something quiet to Derek. He smiled. The papers were laid in front of me. I looked at them for a long moment. I looked at Derek, really looked at him, maybe for the last time, trying to find something I recognized. Then I looked at Sandra's face, at that expression she'd been wearing since the beginning, triumph dressed up as patience. I looked at Crystal's barely contained smile, and I thought about all of it, about the backyard wedding with the wildflowers, about the night I saw that test result and cried good tears, about the apology I gave my husband when I should have trusted my own eyes, about Sandra's phone call, about the word generous, about my daughter, kicking softly inside me with no say in any of this and no protection from any of it except me, and I picked up the pen, and I signed. Crystal's laugh was short and bright, just a small burst of it, like she couldn't help herself. Sandra uncrossed and recrossed her arms. Derek let out a long, slow breath. The notary reached for the papers, and my phone buzzed in my purse. I reached down and looked at the screen without anyone noticing. A text from my mother. 4 words. Your father's almost there. I hadn't called him. She had. She had listened to me on the phone 3 nights ago, heard everything I couldn't say and everything I said I didn't want, and she had called my father anyway, the way a good mother does when her child is too proud to ask for what they need. I set my phone face down on the table, and I waited. The door opened 40 seconds later. Richard Hayes does not enter a room. He arrives in it. He stood in the doorway of that conference room in a collared shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbows, and he said absolutely nothing for a moment. He just looked at the room the way a man looks at a situation he is about to correct. Sandra stiffened immediately. This is a private meeting. My father looked at her the way you look at something that has spoken out of turn. Then he looked past her at Brian Cole. Is that paperwork signed? Brian cleared his throat. Yes, sir. Good. My father pulled out the empty chair beside me and sat down. He placed his hand over mine on the table, warm, steady, immovable, and looked at the people across from him. Then we're just getting started. He set a folder on the table and slid it to the center. Inside that folder was a report from a private investigator my mother had quietly hired 3 weeks ago. My father opened it without drama and talked through it in his steady, unhurried voice. The investigator had documented Derek's affair in careful detail. There were phone records, dates, locations. There was a voicemail, saved by the investigator from a recording my mother had unknowingly kept, of Sandra speaking to Derek, coaching him on how to handle the divorce before I had even been told it was coming. And there was something else, financial records. Money moved out of our joint account during the marriage in amounts and patterns that a family court would recognize as dissipation of marital assets. Fraud. Not an oversight, a plan. Derek looked at Sandra. Sandra looked at the folder. The blood left her face so completely and so quickly that I would have felt sorry for her if I were a different kind of person. Their attorney leaned in and began whispering. Sandra's hand gripped the edge of the table. My father's voice stayed exactly the same volume it had been since he walked in. I understand your family has business interests in this county, he said to Sandra. I imagine a court proceeding, with this documentation becoming public record, would create some difficulties. He paused. I want to give you an opportunity to avoid that. Crystal gathered her bag and her jacket and walked out of the room without saying a word. The door didn't even click shut loudly behind her. She was just gone. Derek looked like a man who had just realized the floor he was standing on was made of paper. Brian Cole was already on his phone in the corner. I am not going to pretend what happened next was dramatic. It wasn't. It was quiet and businesslike, and took several weeks of renegotiation. But the outcome was entirely different from what Sandra had arranged. I received the house, I received full custody, I received child support that reflected the actual cost of raising a child, rather than the minimum Derek's family hoped I'd accept. The settlement accounted for the full value of what I was owed, including what had been quietly moved out of our accounts while I was too exhausted and too trusting to notice. Sandra Calloway never spoke to me again. I think she knew on some level that she had run the wrong play against the wrong family. Derek, without his mother's voice in his ear and with a legal case falling apart around him, cooperated quickly. He didn't have much choice. But I think somewhere underneath all of it, he also felt something close to relief. He had been performing a version of himself that was never real, and it takes energy to sustain a lie that large. My daughter was born 6 weeks later on a Thursday afternoon. I held her while the room was still settling, and she was wrinkled and furious and perfect. I named her June Margaret Hayes. I took my maiden name back the same week she was born. It felt like both of us were arriving somewhere at the same time. My father came to the hospital that evening. He sat in the chair beside my bed, and I put June in his arms, and he looked down at her for a long time without speaking. I watched his face do something it didn't do very often, something soft and full that he didn't have a word for any more than I did. After a while, he said, She's got her mother's chin. Stubborn. Good. People ask me sometimes if I was scared in that conference room, sitting at that table, 7 months pregnant, in a room full of people who had organized themselves around my defeat. And yes, I was scared. I was more scared than I've ever been in my life. And I want to be honest about that, because I don't think there's any strength in pretending fear away. But I had grown up watching my father walk into hard rooms and never once show the walls where they could crack him. Somewhere deep in me, somewhere I hadn't needed to find in a long time, I knew how to do that too. I had just forgotten for a little while. June is 2 years old now. She waves at strangers from her stroller and laughs at everything. She is, as my father correctly diagnosed, deeply stubborn. She woke me up at 4 this morning to inform me that she wanted crackers. I got her the crackers. Some battles you choose carefully. Some you simply show up for. And sometimes, when you're too proud and too tired and too scared to make the call yourself, the people who love you most make it for you. That's enough. That is more than enough.